Okay, the last thing that we need to talk about is what involves examples 3 and 4. And so hopefully you have those glued into your notebook now. So sports director at a school is scheduling meeting times. The director has a list of all the students who are on more than one sports team. So use a network to make a meeting time schedule so that no sport with students in common is given the same meeting. And so here's what you'll do. First, each of these volleyball, football, baseball, tennis, basketball, and track, those are all going to be nodes in your network. So I'll put volleyball, and I usually like to arrange mine in like a circular pattern. It just makes it easier when you have to connect them, that they're all kind of close to each other, or at least accessible to each other. Now the key is we only connect the nodes together where they have students in common. Okay, so I'm just going to go systematically through my list here. So my first name here is Emma, and if I look through, Emma's also in track. So she's in volleyball and track. So we're going to connect volleyball with track because they have Emma in common. So I just draw an edge between the two of them. And then just so I know I've done Emma, I'm going to cross those off, okay? So now we look at Annika. So Annika's in volleyball and tennis. So then we need to connect volleyball with tennis to represent Annika's things that she is in. And then I'm going to cross them out. So this is how you make your graph. So then Max is in football, baseball, and track. So whenever they're in three, you're going to end up making a circuit or a triangle here for these three. So football to baseball. So football to baseball. And then football to track. So football to track. And then track and baseball. So since he's in football, baseball, and track, then you have to do football, baseball to track. Make that triangle, that circuit for those three. Okay, so Max is finished. So I'm going to cross him out. Davis is next. Davis is in football, basketball, and track. So football to basketball. Football to basketball. And then basketball to track. And then track back to football. Now there's already a line there, so I do not need to make another one. Okay, if you do, it's just a little more confusing. If you do, it's not a, you wouldn't get it wrong, but it just is a little more confusing if you do that, because you'd have to do like a curved line, and that's not necessary here. Okay, so now Mateo's in football and tennis, and that is not connected yet, so we will connect that. So there's Mateo, whoops. And then Toby's in baseball and tennis, and that's not connected yet, so we'll connect that. Okay, so we've got everybody. So the key on this one is that whatever your thing is that you have up here, whatever is in that first row there, that's going to be your nodes, and then your edges connect things together that have students in common. Okay. Now we are somehow going to try and get the least amount of groups because the sports director needs to make meeting times so that if you're in more than one thing, you can make all of the different meetings that you're supposed to be involved in. So we need to make some groups. So I'm going to change colors here. Okay, so I always start with whichever node has the highest degree, which in this case is football and track, so I'll just pick football. Okay, so my first group is going to have football in it, and then anything else that doesn't have students in common. So football and track have somebody in common, so we don't want to schedule their meeting times at the same time. Football and baseball have somebody in common. We don't want to have, or basketball, we don't want basketball to happen at the same time. somebody's in football and tennis, so we can't do tennis at the same time, and we can't put football with baseball because they have somebody in common. So the only one that football is not attached to is volleyball. So one set of meeting times is the director can put football and volleyball together because they don't have any kids in common. Okay, so those match. I've already used them. Okay, now go to your next one. So I'm going to go to track because that was the next highest. So track. And then what is track not attached to? That's not already been used. So it's attached to baseball and it's attached to basketball, but it's not attached to tennis. So track and tennis can be scheduled at the same time because they don't have students in common. So track and tennis match. And then the last two, baseball and basketball, they don't have anybody in common either. And so that means that those two meetings can be scheduled at the same time. So I know I can put baseball and basketball, those meetings can happen at the same time because they don't have any students in common. So the least amount of groups that he needs to schedule meeting times for are 3 groups. Okay? And we can't put baseball at the same time as track because they are connected by an edge, which means that they have a student in common. So they have to be scheduled at different times. So then that's baseball and basketball. Okay? And that's it. Okay? Now let's go to the next one, which is your last example. So go ahead and pause and see if you can come up with a network. Remember, these will be your nodes: geometry, history, Spanish, English 3, chemistry, and algebra 2. And then you only connect them together if they have a student in common. So go ahead and pause and do that. Okay, so again, I usually arrange mine kind of around in a circle. So geometry, history, Spanish, English, chemistry, and algebra 2. So I could just use some single letters there just because there's no repeats. Okay, so go through the list. So Jason is in geometry and English 3. So then we're going to connect geometry with English because they have a student in common. And I'll cross them out as we go. Then Franklin is in geometry, history, and chemistry. So remember, if it's 3, we're going to have to connect them. So geometry to history, then history to chemistry, and then chemistry back to geometry. So this triangle represents Franklin's involvement. Okay, Michelle's next. She's in geometry and chemistry. So that's already connected, so we're good on that. Then we go to history is in Allison is in history and Spanish, which is not connected yet, so that works. Crystal was in history and algebra 2, which is not connected yet. So history to algebra 2 for Crystal. And then Jessica is Spanish and English. Connect that. And then Rich is in English and algebra 2. Okay, so there is your network. So now we need to decide what can we schedule at the same time, because remember, you can't have exams that have students in it scheduled at the same time. So if they're in more than one thing, you've got to kind of arrange it so they can still take both of their finals, or all 3 if they're in 3 different things. So again, I'm going to start with the highest degree node, which looks like history this time. So we can schedule history, And history is not connected to English, so history and English can be scheduled at the same time. So that works. Okay. Then, let's see, next highest would be geometry. Go hard around that one. So geometry is not connected to Algebra 2 or Spanish. So we could do geometry and Algebra 2. And we could also do Spanish because Spanish is not connected to geometry or Algebra 2. So I compare all three of those together, and then I could have chemistry in its own group. That's the last one. Now your other alternative between these two, or you could have geometry and Spanish, or geometry, let's say geometry, yeah, you could do geometry, Spanish, and then you could do Algebra 2 and Chem. That's another variation of these two that would also work. Because chemistry is not touching Algebra 2, so those two could be together. And then geometry and Spanish aren't touching, so those two could be together. Because maybe it's you can't have 3 in a block, which is fine. Then you could do 2 and 2 and switch that up. Or you could do geometry and Algebra 2 and then Spanish and chemistry. So any grouping, as long as geometry and Algebra 2 aren't as long as geometry and chemistry are not put together because they're connected. So you can't do geometry and chemistry together, but Algebra 2 could come over here and Spanish could go over here. Okay? Alright, so that concludes the notes for today. I'll tell you tomorrow's networks quiz will, basically if you can answer the 2 essential questions from networks day 1 and networks day 2, then you will be okay for that networks quiz. So get those repetitions in, go back and do summaries that will answer those essential questions to make sure you know what you're doing. Go back and highlight and circle. Do some questions, chunking, and then answer those questions to your level 2 or answer your level 2 questions. So if there's time, make sure that you are using it to either do homework or do some of your repetitions because your test is coming up very soon. All right, have a great day.